All right, let's open our Bibles this evening to Revelation chapter 8, shall we? Revelation chapter 8, verse 1. In the past two chapters, we've been looking at these judgments that God is beginning to pour out upon the earth during especially the final 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation. We started in chapter 6 with the seal judgments. There are three really groups of judgments: the seal, the trumpets, and then the bowls or the vials, sometimes translated vials. But the seventh really seal judgment and the seventh trumpet one just carry the next seven forth. And as we start on these, I think these last a little while longer. The second group goes a little quicker, and the third ones, according to the Lord's own words, go very quickly. So we are then towards the end. But we looked in chapter 6, and we saw the first seal sent forth, the Antichrist, who for 3.5 years really did take advantage and place himself in the eyes of the world as the Messiah, the one with the answers, the one that would give Israel an opportunity to build their temple and all, the peacemaker in the Middle East. The church has been taken out, and really starting from chapter 6, verse 2 in the second seal, everything else in the entire book seems to take place after that 3.5 year period where the Antichrist, in the middle of that 7-year period, comes to the finished temple and stops the worship, stops the sacrifice, declares that he is God, demands worship under threat of death. And that's really when all of these things begin to fall. So we saw 6 of those judgments, the 6 seals, if you will. The Antichrist revealed, the war that followed, the famine that followed the war, the death in great numbers with the 4th seal, a myriad, a group of martyred souls under the altar in heaven crying out for the Lord to avenge their deaths there in seal 5. And then tremendous upheaval upon the earth, earthquakes and stars falling from the sky and darkness as men began to cower in fear, knowing that God was bringing his wrath upon them. Before the 7th seal was opened, we spent some time there in chapter 7 where God revealed to us the big picture of salvation. And we mentioned to you that there are certainly a couple more of these where the Lord, in the midst of judgment, stops and says, but look at the fruit. And it is certainly God's word that he wants to save, that his heart is to save, not to judge. God does not rejoice in the death of the wicked. He rejoices in the death of the saints. That's his will. And so even as we continue tonight through these horrific judgments, they are all predicated upon prophecy. God said it would be like this. The book is intended to say all that God has said God will do. He will, in the end, rule and reign. Every knee will bow. It will be just as he said. And so we read them because we want to know that as God has spoken, so God will do, and we can count on his word. And I think maybe the best thing that you can come away from these judgment chapters with is just that. God's going to do what he said, and God's interested in salvation. God loves the lost. He wants them to be saved. But in chapter 7, we stop before the 7th seal judgment, and the Lord seals these 144,000 witnesses to be his mouthpieces. And we talked about them and who they were, these Jewish believers, first fruits. And they, along with the angel flying through the heavens with the everlasting gospel that we'll see in chapter 14, and the 2 witnesses that we'll meet in chapter 11, and the zealous saints who will not take, death will not stop them from preaching, are going to be those that the Lord uses during this time to bring many in. So by the time you get to chapter 7, verse 1, there's this innumerable amount of folks as we go that the Lord gathers together. And verse 9, I should say. And in the past few weeks, we've talked about how many folks would be upon the earth and how many would come to know the Lord and all. Tonight in chapter 8, we pick up the story from the end of chapter 6. And we go back to the chronology, and the 7th seal is going to be opened. And like I said, the 7th seal is nothing more than really the bringing forth of the next 7, this time the trumpets. Even later, the 7th trumpet will open the 7 vial judgments. Now, both the trumpet and vial judgments, or bowl judgments, bring out the same judgments in the same order. So if you put them together and you put the verses next to them, you'll find that they are only distinguished by intensity and by the speed in which they are carried out. These first 6 seal judgments seem to develop over a period of time. War and famine take a while. Death from famine. These next 6 are judged in order, and so are the ones that follow that. Just the ones that follow go by quickly, and they're very much more intense. But all of them have that same order. And so we will see God dealing with the earth first, and then the seas, and then the rivers, and then the heavens, and then demonic torment before the armies and the nations are dealt with by the Lord. So they are in that order each time. They should be like that as well in your notes. But with the introduction of these 7 trumpets and vials, something else happens if you read commentaries, and that is all of a sudden speculators become Bible expositors. And I found that the greatest confusion for people who want to know the book of Revelation is found in these chapters where John begins to describe the things that he sees, and the folks who read them begin to tell you what John meant. Now, let me say a couple of things about that, just to have you kind of stay with the Bible and not venture too far away with all of this. He might have meant stuff. First of all, John was given by the Lord at 90 years old the job of writing down everything he sees. That was his responsibility. The Lord said, you write it down. Chapter 1, verse 11, chapter 1, verse 19, write it down. Write it down. So John takes this seriously. In fact, in a couple of chapters, he's going to hear some thunder talking, and he's going to start writing it down. The Lord's going to say, hey, stop. Don't write that part down. I mean, he's that diligent about writing it down. Second of all, John is going to explain with his first century understanding everything the Lord shows him. Now, that to the best of his ability, he's not going to be very far off, in other words, right? The guy's going to do everything he can to serve the Lord and write it down in a way that it can be understood. And so John is going to, with first century mindset, try to explain with similes and with metaphors things that he may not fully understand, but they are descriptive terms that are accurate to what John sees. And I think that you would do well in your understanding of the book of Revelation to just leave that alone. Rather than to begin to walk down the lanes of, well, he's really explaining an airplane and a vapor trail and a nuclear bomb. Great. What is John's purpose? John's purpose is to bring the revelation of Jesus and the judgment of God and the mercy of God to bear upon the final generation. So to explain away what John is explaining to us, first of all, is foolish. That's not God's will. God's will is that people go, that's the Lord, and we should serve him. And second of all, I think we're pretty obnoxious if we think somehow John really didn't know what he's talking about. Well, he's a first century, dumb guy. No, he was a guy filled with the Spirit, met with God, and given the greatest revelation that the Bible has to carry for us, the end of all things. And so, I don't mind guessing, and I guess it's fun to talk about it, but at least admit you don't know, and don't lose sight of the bigger picture, which is God says this is going to happen. It will happen exactly as he says, that his judgment is terrible. He doesn't rejoice in it. He'd rather that all men would be saved and delivered from his wrath by his Son. When it comes to Bible study rather than Bible speculation, and usually the folks who do the most speculating are folks who make their living teaching prophecy, because they've always got to come up with something new for you to think about and read. So, if you're a one-trick guy, you got to really work that horse, you know what I'm saying? Better that you just, in Bible study, stick with the Bible. When we begin to read, and we read, for example, that these first 4 trumpets are the result of God having the angels blow the trumpet, whether it's nuclear fallout on the ecology or not, it doesn't really matter to me. God doesn't need a method to intervene in my life. He doesn't need me to explain how he's going to mess with me or how he's going to judge the world. And I will show you tonight and in the weeks to come as well that much of what we will read here has happened before. That the Lord visited in much the same way many of these plagues by the hand of the Lord upon the people of Egypt when they were holding his people. And the equivalencies are phenomenal. And all I can tell you is, for sure, is that when the trumpet sounds, the devastating result will happen upon the earth because God said it will, and as he judges the wickedness of men and their rebellion in the hopes that they will repent, it'll happen just as he said. So tonight we'll begin these trumpet judgments by looking at the first 4, all of chapter 8, 13 verses. We will not speculate, because unless I know, I won't tell you. I'll tell you I don't know. I'd rather that than have you run off, well, Pastor Jack said. Then I'm dead, Lord gets mad at me. But these first 4 judgments of the 7 are sometimes called 1/3 judgments. And they are called that because with every trumpet sound, 1/3 of something tremendously suffers or it dies. The focus, though, in these is early on the life-supporting systems upon the earth. The things that man had been taking from God as he blesses both, and the rain falls on the just and the unjust. You take it for granted. This is how we live. This is what I can do. But really, your very breath is in his hands. And God now, with these judgments, begins to remove the things with which or without which you cannot really survive. The next two that we will look at next week, actually we'll look at, I think, one at a time, will focus on man, on man's life and upon his decision-making. But for now, remember in chapter 7, the Lord had sealed the 144,000 to go out and begin to do the work. Out of the earth and the judgments that we've read, the seal judgment, thousands were dying for their faith and ending up under the throne of heaven. And the Lord is now in chapter 8 ready to proceed again. So we read in verse 1, when he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. There is a pause in a couple of these. In fact, there's a pause before the seventh trumpet as well. In fact, the seventh trumpet, there's a great deal of pause and a lot of circumspect kind of wandering around. The Lord points out a lot of things like you do a 360, and over here this is going on, over that's going on, and it makes a complete, okay, let's move on. But here's a pause again. I heard someone once say, I wouldn't blame it on the person who says it because it's someone else's line, but they said, there must not be any women in heaven because there's silence for a half an hour. Now, I told him how wicked that was, and I didn't appreciate it at all. I told him for all of you ladies because I was upset. I was. I think you slip in every joke you can while you're going through it. John guesses the silence in heaven was about half an hour. No time in eternity is at least not true yet, because there is still a relationship between eternal heaven and a earth and a time frame and a time that God is dealing with the earth. But John estimates the time as given to him here in the vision. He said for about half an hour. That's about the best he could come up with. But a half an hour is a long time to be quiet when you've been hanging around heaven for a while. And every time something goes on, there's great shouting, there's lots of worship, lots of praise, angels singing, saints crying. It's not a quiet place. It's a very worshipful place. And, you've heard silence and gold is golden, but not here. This is ominous. It's almost like, the calm before the storm. Zephaniah, when he wrote his prophecy about this time, said, "Be silent in the presence of the Lord, for the day of the Lord is at hand. He has prepared a sacrifice, and he has invited his guests." He writes in chapter 2, verse 3, "And there was an angel who talked with me going out, and another was coming out to meet him, and he declared that we should be silent before him." Hebrews talks about the Lord is in his holy temple. Let the earth keep silence before him. So all of heaven holds its collective breath. The sealing has been taken care of. We've got to meet some of the saints that have come out of the tribulation. And John said, I think it was about a half an hour. When Jesus opened that seventh seal, nothing moved for half an hour. And then he saw, verse 2, 7 angels standing before God. To them were given 7 trumpets. Now our attention is drawn by John to these angels, each one given a trumpet. And when they sound those trumpets, then a judgment from God falls. So always the connection, and that's the important issue for us. It's the Lord who opens, it's the Lord who commands, it's the Lord who sends forth these judgments. Suffering upon the earth during the Great Tribulation has its source in heaven. Satan might be used, the earth might fall apart, but God is the source. It's his judgment, which is very different from today. People go, well, the church is going to go through the tribulation. Impossible. I've been saved from God's wrath. It's the wrath of God in the tribulation. It's just the world, the flesh, and the devil now. We battle all kinds of things. God's now for me. He's not against me, but in the tribulation, he's against you. He's bringing judgment upon those who don't believe. And so, as with the seals, the action, there's a corresponding action upon the earth. They sound the alarm, if you will, of God's wrath. And we've seen the 4 living creatures, the 4 angels that we called seraphim or cherubim, depending on how many wings they have. Here there are 7 more angels, maybe archangels. We don't know. If there are archangels, we know Gabriel stands in the presence of the Lord. He told Zechariah that in Luke chapter 1. We know Michael hangs around there. So that'd be 2 of the 7, if so. We see one of the archangels yelling for us when the Lord returns with a shout and the trumpet of God in 1 Thessalonians 4:16 to gather the church. So angels play a big role in all of these things, and they have different rankings and all, but this is an angel that certainly, these 7 angels are ones called forward to sound the alarm, if you will, for these next judgments. Now, if you look at the way trumpets are used in the Old Testament, they basically had 3 functions, and you can find all 3 of them in Numbers chapter 10. They all happen to be in one spot. But one of them was to gather people together for prayer or for announcements or for direction. Imagine 2 million people and you needed to have a word with them, And so the trumpeters would sound and the people would gather, and that would be useful for them, or to pray. They were used, a different trumpet sound, to call armies together for battle. And then they had a special trumpet just for special occasions: the giving of the law, the feast days, the anointing of a king, the calling of a fast, a different sound. In the New Testament, there are only 2 purposes for the trumpets being used in the work of God. The first one is to call the church to himself, the trumpet of God. The second one is to declare the judgment of God, that God is now going to act. Verse 3 says, "Then another angel, having a golden censer, came, and he stood at the altar, and he was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all of the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of that incense with the prayers of the saints ascended before God from the angel's hand. And the angel took that censer, and he filled it with fire from the altar, and he threw it to the earth. And there was noise and thunder and lightning and an earthquake. And so the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound." Now, I know sometimes when we go through the Bible on Sunday nights that we find folks dropping off about the time we get to Leviticus. They're into Genesis and Abraham and David. Joseph, and they love that, and Exodus and Moses, and we like that. And then they get to Leviticus. Yeah, I'm really busy this week. And when are you done, by the way? I actually have had somebody, how many weeks will you be going through Leviticus? Kind of like, they're going to check that off their map. And somehow they see this Old Testament study of the tabernacle and all as very tedious or boring or difficult or without relevance. But that's not at all the case. It's the earliest report from the Lord on what heaven is like. It becomes the actual picture on earth of that which is in a grander scale in heaven. Hebrews 9:24 talks about Christ entered into the holy place made with hands, has not entered into the holy place made with hands, which are copies of the true, but he has entered into heaven itself to appear before the presence of God for us. So everything that you read there and the whole way that the thing is laid out is absolutely a reflection of what you're going to see in heaven. So if you're bored with Leviticus, maybe you'll be bored going to heaven. I doubt it. So you study and you look, and everything there has something to do with what Jesus came to do for us. Every little, part and metal and thread and creation, each portion has a significant representation of Jesus' work. Whether it is the altar of sacrifice, not the gold altar we read here, but the altar of sacrifice was outside. It's where the laver was, where the priest would have to wash himself in a brass laver, the judgment, metal that always speaks of sin. Or whether you go into the holy place where the candlestick is and the showbread with the 12 loaves representing the tribes, or the candlestick, or the altar of incense, the only light being this candlestick. The altar of incense standing before the Holy of Holies, before that big 18-inch thick curtain that the priests only go into once a year, but every day he'd come into the holy place and he'd keep the incense lit, and it represented the prayers of the people always before the Lord. Beautiful picture. It's exactly what you see here in the book of Revelations. And every morning and afternoon, the priest would burn that incense before the Lord. In fact, when John the Baptist's dad, Zacharias, was visited by the Lord there, by an angel in Luke 1, that was his job that week. That's the lot that he drew. That was the assignment he was given. He was in there lighting incense when the angel came to tell him about, the child he was going to have. And you remember, he just had a hard time believing it, and he came out, first he came out late. People went, what took you? It's just a few candles, And then, he couldn't speak, and oh man, he's met with the Lord, and something's gone wrong. And, poor John the Baptist's dad, Zachariah, he should have believed. He didn't. But that was what his job was at the time. So the incense here, we read it twice, speaks of the prayers of the saints. Psalm 141 verse 2 said, "Let my prayers be set before you as incense, and the lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice." Let my worship please you and be a sweet smell. And you find that analogy used constantly by the Lord through the scripture. So now we come to heaven and we're here at this time of judgment. But in heaven we see all of those things in place. From God's perspective, your prayers are sweet smelling aroma, pleasant to him. So you think about that the next time you pray. Even if you're not getting answered, the Lord's storing them up. He's bringing them out. You know, for how long has that box of prayer, that incense, been being held in heaven while you and I in every generation cry out, come quickly, Jesus, come back. And the Lord captures that. We'll keep that there. And now he's going to come back. Guess what? Now that stuff's going to burn. You know, it's going to smell. The Lord is going to hear the cries of his people over every generation. It's such a good thing to know your prayers don't just escape, you know. Oh, I just feel like God's not listening. Oh, no, he's listening. More than that, he's saving them up. You know, and they are pleasing in his sight. So this other angel, there's 7 standing, but here comes another angel, and this angel comes to the altar of incense in heaven with a censer that contains coals from the altar of sacrifice, that altar outside. Now, it's important because the altar of sacrifice was the place where the sacrifice of the lamb was made so that his blood could enable you to come and worship God, which is the same stamp that you'll find in the scriptures everywhere. Your prayers, your sacrifices are only acceptable to the Lord when they are lit by the fire of sacrifice. In other words, you've come to Jesus through the cross, and because of that, you've gone through that sacrificial altar. You can now come and offer your prayers as incense and come to this golden altar which stood in the middle. The lamb was slain upon the outside altar. The blood was shed there. In heaven, it's always going to be a tribute to Jesus, that altar of sacrifice standing outside, if you will. Well, notice here that the angel has given much incense to burn. In other words, there's been a lot of prayer, I think. And here's the golden altar, the one that sat in the Holy of Holies, right before the sat in the holy place, right before the Holy of Holies. And if you read Exodus, I think 30, it talks about the special incense that the formula God gave to the people, to the priests. They weren't allowed to ever use it for themselves. It was a smell only God could have. It was a unique scent. It was the Jesus cologne, you know, but it's his. Nobody else can have it. You just got to bring it to him, right? So that's his. And notice in verse 4 that the incense and the prayers that represented are offered before the Lord. And to think of that, think how valuable God, or what value God places on your prayer. And he doesn't forget about your prayers. He honors them. You know, there's that verse in 2 Chronicles where it says that the priests and the Levites arose blessing the people, and their voice was heard, and their prayer came to his holy dwelling place. It came to heaven. So God spoke there, 2 Chronicles 30, verse 27, about the prayers of the servants rising to the throne and God receiving them. You remember reading about Cornelius and how he there in Acts 10 was really just praying out, Lord, I want to know you better. He was a Gentile, a centurion. And the angel of the Lord came to him, and when he saw the angel, it scared him, as you might imagine. And he said to him, what is it, Lord? And the angel said to him, your prayers and your alms have come up as a memorial before God. God has been receiving your prayers. So don't just think prayer is a place where you get it or you don't. I've been rattling God's cage and he hasn't answered. It's a place of worship. It's a place of honor. And God receives your faith in coming to him in prayer as such. And those prayers find themselves here. I don't know how many years you prayed for your family members to be saved, or your friends, or your kids, or your husband. But one day they come to Jesus, and I don't doubt that the prayers here represented are just those things. Now, in particular here, certainly the cries of the folks that are suffering for justice. David, I think in Psalm 59, cried out particularly for the Lord's justice to be brought to bear. Asaph did the same thing. In Psalm 83, he cried out, "Oh Lord, how long? How long?" But still, here is the cries of those who have been waiting upon the Lord. And God is going to move now. The end is near. All that we've been asking God to do is just down the road. And it's getting closer and closer. And the prayers are out. So be sure you're storing some prayer up to honor the Lord. I thought about that Genesis 4 where it said that Enoch's blood shed was crying out from the ground. God is very aware. Verse 5 tells us that the censer is now brought to the altar of sacrifice, where coals are taken from it and thrown to the earth. Now, follow the analogy. The place where the sacrifice was made, where Jesus ultimately would give his life, where the lamb was slain, not that gold altar in front of the place of worship where you've gotten into that holy place, but that altar of sacrifice which you have to pass through. It is from that altar, the altar of sacrifice, that the angel now takes coals and throws them to the earth. In other words, the same fire that consumed the lamb where his blood was poured out for our sin, that brought sweet prayers into his presence, is the same fire that brings judgment to the rebellious. The judgment that man will face has everything to do with Jesus. Everything. Everything to do with him. Did you receive him? Then you come in and your prayers are accepted. Did you not? Then you find he will one day judge you. And so here's the same coals. The wrath of God against man in the purest sense is only for the rejection of Christ. That's it. There's no greater sin. There's no more foolish act. If you despise the Lamb of God, then you are going to find his judgment. Here's what Isaiah wrote in chapter 6 of his prophecy. Woe is me, I'm undone. I'm a man of unclean lips. I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. My eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. And then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a live coal taken with tongs from the altar, and he touched my mouth, and he said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away, and your sins have been purged. God washed and made clean. That's really all it took. He didn't talk to Isaiah about his waywardness or his hesitancy or whatever it might have been. I realize my sin here. The sacrifice there upon the altar will remove or wash your sin. And that's exactly what the Lord paints for us here. Yet, if you refuse him, then he destroys you. Jesus said there in Matthew, if you fall on this stone, you'll be broken. But on whomever this stone falls, it will grind him to powder. It's all about the cross, isn't it? That's really all people go, I'm a Christian. Have you been to the cross? Hey, I believe in God. Great. Have you been to the cross? I'm a religious guy. Wonderful. Have you been to the cross? Because that's where the judgment comes from. It's from that altar that life either is given or life is eventually going to be taken away. There's no other place to go. And even in heaven, before these judgments fall, the action of the angels, in that heavenly scene that is so portrayed in the Old Testament is absolutely consistent. You don't get by to the holy place until you pass by the altar of sacrifice and have your sins cleansed, washed, if you will, by the blood of the Lamb. The Bible says that the Lord is a consuming fire. You'll either be refined or you'll be destroyed. It just depends on what you're made of, and you accept Jesus or you face him as judge, but it's Jesus you're going to deal with. You're going to face him as the Lord who died and rose, or you're going to face him as the judge in the court, right? And that's what the world is about to face here in chapter 8. That's what they're going to have to face up to. So, as the prayers of the saints rise, and the coals from the fire of the sacrifice are thrown down upon the rejecting, fire hits the earth, and some things happen. They hear noises. It's the word for voices. The Greek word is phone, like phone. Same as in chapter 4, verse 5, when John first showed up and went, I hear voices, There was that power of God at work around him. Identical to Mount Sinai when the Lord in Exodus 19 came to give the law. You heard the voices that surrounded the appearance and the presence of God. Thunder, lightning, earthquake, and then the trumpets are ready to sound because God is speaking, God is moving, God is judging. And so, verse 6, the angels stepped forward to take their place. The judgment of God for rejecting the altar of sacrifice now begins. Verse 7. The first angel sounded, and hail and fire followed, mingled with blood, and they were thrown to the earth, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all of the green grass was burned up. Now, hail and fire mingled with blood fall upon the earth, and a third of the trees, all of the green grass is burned up. Vegetation loss upon the earth. Now, the grass is apparently allowed to grow back because we will read in chapter 9, verse 4, that the locusts' marching orders are to eat all of the grass. So, for now, a third of the trees and all the grass is taken away. You might write in your margin, or if you have one of the notes, look later at Exodus chapter 9, the seventh plague that fell upon the children of Israel, and especially upon Egypt. And you remember that the Lord spoke, and he said, tomorrow I'm going to cause a heavy hail to come down as you haven't seen in Egypt since you began. So you better gather your livestock and get them into cover and all, because every animal found in the field that's not in the house is going to die. And then hail is going to be mixed with blood, and it'll strike the whole earth, and every herb of the field and every grass of the field will be destroyed. Doesn't that sound familiar to you? Now, if you go to Exodus with these prophecy guys who want to tell you about nuclear fallout here, and you say to them, what happened in Exodus, back here in chapter 9? And they'll say, well, I don't know, but the Lord just moved. So, well, why can't the Lord just move in Revelation chapter 8? Why do we now need an explanation for him? He did it before. I don't need to have a vehicle. I just need to know it's the Lord, right? The trumpet sounds, the seventh seal has been opened, and the judgment of God begins. And the impact is absolutely the same as you read about it in Exodus. Now, the prophet Joel in chapter 1, verse 15 of this prophecy, because that's where we look to see what God is going to do. He says, alas, the day of the Lord is at hand. It'll come as destruction from the Almighty to cut food off from before our eyes, and joy and gladness from the house of God. The seed will shrivel under the clouds. Storehouses are in shambles, barns broken down, grain is withered, animals groan. The herds are restless because they have no pasture. Even the flocks of sheep now suffer punishment. O Lord, to you I cry out, fire has devoured the open pasture. A flame has burned all the trees of the field. The beasts of the field cry out to you. The water brooks, they are dried up, and fire has devoured all of our pastures. Blow the trumpet, sound the alarm. Let the inhabitants of the land tremble. The day of the Lord is coming. The day of the Lord is at hand. And the very next chapter, I'll show you wonders in the heavens and wonders in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. Exactly what the prophet said. Why is Revelation important? Because it fulfills every verse that you've read until you get here. And it is exactly as God has declared. The cause of the plague in Exodus was certainly not nuclear. And we read it and take it literally. I think we should do the same thing here. Here's what the psalmist wrote in Psalm 105. He gave them hail for rain, flaming fire for their land. He struck their vines and their fig trees, splintering their trees of their territory, destroying them all. It's the psalmist. Same thing. Why is that important? Because I believe that God means what he says. And when we read our Bibles, we have to know that if we read it in the context and we read it properly, God's going to do what God says. You can bank on it. Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed with the exact same hail and fire. The only difference between Exodus 9 and Revelation chapter 8 is that Exodus 9 was very limited in scope. It was limited to the land. It didn't even fall upon the children of Israel. God protected them. This is worldwide. This falls upon the land, as you know it, the world. Now, the word for tree here in verse 7 implies fruit tree, and it is almost always used like that, where the word grass has a lot of translations. It's translated wheat and oats and rice, maybe another famine to follow. But indeed, when you lose pasture, you lose livestock, and then you lose milk and grain. In the plagues in Egypt, man and beast were lost with fire mingled with blood, we read there in Exodus. So we can speculate as to how God causes this to happen or not, and I only mention it to you because there's very few books you can read that actually just concern themselves with letting the Bible interpret the Bible. And I think your best view is to let the supernatural be the supernatural, because it's supernatural. Thank the Lord that he doesn't need my help to explain it. And it will come. That's the first trumpet. The third of the trees and the green grass as hail and fire mingled with blood fall upon the earth from the altar of sacrifice, right? The coals. Verse 8, then the second angel, he blew his trumpet, and something like, now there's John's analogy, I don't know what it is, but something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood. A third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. Now the word like is a term of similitude. It is John doing his best to describe exactly what he saw. Again, I would reference Exodus chapter 7, the first plague in Egypt. Was God taking the waters of the Nile and the tributaries of the Nile and turning them to blood. How he did that, I have no idea. Nor does anyone in the book of Exodus commentary go, well, here's how he did it. No, it's the Lord's judgment. Let my people go. I'll turn your drinking water into blood. How will that work for you? In this judgment, God again sends something into the waters. John said, it looked like a big mountain to me. All right, so what is it? I don't know. Something that looked like a big mountain. And it was on fire. I mean, John's doing his best, man. That's the best he could do. I don't think he's going to be so far off. You're not going to go, man, that doesn't look like a burning mountain at all when you get there. No, I think he's going to be very close. Whatever it is and however it worked, because the Lord's pouring out his wrath, it affected the waters and those in it. Now think about this. 3/4 of the world is covered with water, of our world. What did John see? A meteor? I don't know. We just know God caused it, don't we? Isaiah chapter 2 said this, the day of the Lord of hosts is upon us. It shall come upon everything proud and lofty. Everything lifted up shall be brought low, the cedars of Lebanon high and lifted up, the oaks of Bashan on the high mountains, on the hills, on the high tower, on the fortified wall, on the ships of Tarshish, on the beautiful slopes. The loftiness of man is going to be brought down, and the haughtiness of men will be brought low. The Lord alone will be exalted in that day, while the idols shall utterly be abolished. They shall go into the holes of the rocks and the caves of the earth, from the terror of the Lord and the glory of his majesty, when he arises to shake the earth mightily. In that day, man will cast his idols of silver away, and his idols of gold, each which he has made for himself to worship, to the moles and to the bats, to the clefts of the rocks, to the crags of the rugged rocks, from the terror of the Lord and the glory of his majesty, when he arises to mightily shake the earth. Hosea says, therefore the land will mourn, everyone who dwells in it will waste away, with the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, even the fish of the sea will be taken away. When has that happened? It hasn't, but it will, as Hosea says. So then you begin to, as a Bible student, grab those prophetic utterances that are long-term and are fulfilled in the tribulation. You begin to mark them in your Bible. This is going to take place, Revelation chapter 8. So as you read, the Bible gets to be a bit smaller, because now you're able to put things together as you're a student and as you're studying. But notice that as John spoke, and as the prophet spoke of the loss of marine life, that again, there's a lot of death. Blood usually identifies death. And we live close enough to the coast where if you've been to the beach during red tide, you don't stay very long. We've had several years where we had plankton die due to pollution and sometimes rising water temperatures, although that's not as common of a cause. But you can't even get close to the beach. It stinks so bad, right? It's just rotting, and it just stench is horrible. Now, imagine 1/3 of all marine life dying, and even sinking 1/3 of the ships on the oceans around the world. This is the work of God, only God. You don't want to trust me, you don't want to look to me. Your food sources begin to disappear, your ability to fish and to be, supported by that which comes out of the water. And then we read in verse 10, the third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven. John doesn't say he said it was a star that was burning like it was a torch. And it fell on the third of the rivers and on the springs of water, and the name of the star is wormwood. 1/3 of the water becomes wormwood. Many men die from the water because it was made bitter. So the trumpet sounds, and the third judgment is upon the fresh water or drinking water. And John sees a burning star, which looks like it's a torch, and it strikes the fountains or the springs, if you will, the fresh water supply. And John called the star wormwood. It's a word associated with a poison, and it is used that way throughout the Old Testament, especially. The root bearing bitterness or wormwood, you'll find constantly, it speaks of death. So there's no direct plague in Egypt to correlate with this. You do find in Exodus 15, when the people of God leave Egypt, that the Lord is directed by the Lord, or Moses is, at a place that they'll call Mara, bitter, to heal the waters that are bitter by throwing a tree in. Kind of an interesting analogy, but as again, everything points to Jesus. When he died on the tree, look, my life, dead, is now made alive in him, right? It's the same thing. They have living water. God has given them fresh water to drink. Lives have been supported. You need it to live. And now God begins to take it away, 1/3 of it, not all of it, but enough where men begin to die and life begins to suffer. People have to question, how am I going to survive? And what am I going to do? So, today God, by his grace, will make bitter lives filled with sin sweet with his forgiveness, if you'll drink by faith. Yet one day, like here, the dreams and ambitions of men, who have been bitter to God will no longer respond. National Geographic has made a list of, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, of the 100 principal rivers upon which the world most depends. And the first one they listed was the Amazon, which is about 4,000 miles long. I think the last one was the Rio de la Plata, which is maybe 150 miles long itself. But these rivers, these 100, literally sustain 95% of the world population. In the United States, the U.S. Geological Survey lists 30 primary rivers, starting with the Mississippi, which I think is only 300 miles shorter than the Amazon, 37 something. So imagine a third of all of those waters being polluted. You know, we see people today all up in arms about their environment. Wait till the Lord gets a hold of you, you know? You think illegal dumping is going to hurt you. Wait till the Lord radically touches life. So here's my plea. We don't need explanations to understand how this selectively might work. We just need to believe God's going to do this, as he said to the Pharaoh. Moses, go tell the Pharaoh. He ain't going to believe that. Yeah, you tell him anyway. And then the Lord did it. And then number 2, and then number 5, and then number 8. Is he believing yet? No, he's a real slow guy to believe, you know? And pretty soon he could not believe. So fresh water. First, you know, the grasses, the trees, the fruit, the livestock feed, you know, grain and oats. Then, secondly, the oceans and that which was in them, which certainly supports a lot of life. Third, the drinking water is affected. And then finally, verse 12, then the fourth angel sounded, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars. A third of them were darkened, a third of the day did not shine, and likewise the night. So here the heavens are touched by the Lord. How? I don't know. But especially if you can make day and night, effectively do this every day and night, it's hard to place a natural cause for any of this. So 33% reduction of light, heat, and energy arriving to the earth. Now, you remember Exodus chapter 10, there were 3 days of thick darkness, so that in the middle of the day, man couldn't see their hand before their face. And it terrified the people. Now, that was just 3 days. It's a similar judgment. Again, for the Lord dealing with Pharaoh, there it's localized and short. Here it is worldwide and significantly longer. So a reduction of light upon the earth. Amos wrote in chapter 5, is not the day of the Lord darkness and not light? Is it not very dark with no brightness? Isaiah writes in chapter 13, behold, the day of the Lord comes cruel with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate. He will destroy its sinners. The stars of heaven and their constellations will not give their life. The sun will be darkened in its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will halt the arrogance of the proud and lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. Who said that? Isaiah, 700 BC. When has that happened? It hasn't. When will it happen? Revelation chapter 8. Why do we call it Revelation? Because it fulfills everything that has yet to be fulfilled, so that you might know and I might know that God means what he says. Now, why else do we need to look through all of these things? Well, it scares me. It motivates me to want to go say to people, man, you got to get saved. You don't want to be hanging around when this comes, you know. But usually people will look at it like you're a fool. Oh, yeah, I'll take my chances. You know, I got a pretty cool garage. Yeah, that's going to help you, you know. They play it off. And so sometimes it's a hard thing to share Revelation because people mock you with it. But so you have to go back to, you're a sinner, man. You're not happy. There's no peace. You don't know where you stand with God. But then this is left for me to be encouraged by. And I'm encouraged by it because I know that God is going to do what he says. Everything lines up. There's intersections between the activities and the prophets of old. In fact, in chapter 10, we're going to read the Lord declaring, you know, there's not going to be any time. Actually, the angel will declare there's not going to be any delay. And from now on, the mysteries of God are going to be finished, the ones that he declared to his servants, the prophets. It's going to all come to pass. There's nothing going to be left undone. So this fourth one is pretty scary, you know. The judgment of God against the heavens. Now, when we get to the fourth vial, remember I told you that they are equal, they are the same judgments, the trumpets and the vials. They run the same four we read, you'll see in the vials. In the fourth vial, God will reverse this condition. He will intensify the result, the sun, and the result will be men will be burning from the heat. You can read about it in Revelation 16. And then just prior to the return of Jesus, while all of these are finished, Matthew 24 says, then the sun will be darkened yet again. It'll go the opposite way again. Nobody ought to wonder who this is, you know. It's cold, it's hot, it's cold. What's going on? The Lord's going on. And you still got a little bit of time. You read Matthew 24 there, 29 and 30. God alone can turn it on and turn off the heavens he has made. So the world should not be mistaken. They're dealing with Almighty God. So you have these Old Testament prophets, and they speak of the darkness. And some of them speak of the heat. And then you hear of the darkness right before the Lord comes. And you realize that from Revelation chapter 8 with this fourth trumpet to again with the vial to again to the time when the Lord is about ready to come, the heat goes up and down and up. But it's the Lord's control. And you're able to just put those prophecies exactly where you'll find them in God's Word. And those who like guessing will tell you, many of them, this is nuclear fallout, this is nuclear winter. It's funny that the nuclear winter seems to last 12 hours, and then the sun and the night, and then, just who cares? It could just be like, the book of Exodus. God is simply putting his glory on display and his authority so that no one will find a reason to refuse him. Unfortunately, Pharaoh, despite the evidence, still died in his sins. And unfortunately, the last days will find some folks as well. Then we read verse 13, and I looked and I heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth because of the remaining blasts of the trumpet of the three angels who are about to sound. 4 trumpets have passed. When the announcement is heard, 3 woes for the 3 trumpets that have yet to sound. Woe is not good in the Bible. I think we mentioned to you that before, right? When the Lord says woe, you should probably duck. It's never like, whoa, like we do. Whoa, that's cool. No, it's whoa. Oh no, whoa is good. You remember it that way. And the things that follow are definitely more horrifying than the previous 4. You haven't ever seen anything like it, he cries. And I truly believe, again, that this angel comes to encourage hearts back to the Lord, because that's always God's will. It's kind of like he turns up the heat, and then the angel comes and he says, now, whoa, it's going to get worse. You sure you don't want to straighten your act out? You sure you don't want to come around now? You sure you don't want to give up now? You sure don't want to believe now? God tends to just put the brakes on every so often when difficulty has arisen so men might repent. Woe is coming. The fifth trumpet is frightening. We're going to look at these guys next week. They are frightening guys. And then the 6th one is just as bad, as millions come. It's horrible. And then the 7th one just brings forth, 7 vials. It starts all over again with greater intensity and repeated quicker on top of one another, if you will. So, here comes the angel of the Lord. God has now begun to effect what the rebellious had freely been given and enjoyed and taken for granted. What sustained their life is now being slowly removed. And God in his mercy could have just went like that. But he does like this. He just pushes, wake up, wake up. Because God is good. And why does he do that? Because he wants all men to be saved. He's systematically removing life-sustaining things, but he wants people to be saved. So no one left on the earth should wonder anymore who they're dealing with. Good thing that today you can get saved and miss out on all this. You can be wise early and often. Next week we will look at the first 12 verses of chapter 9, look at just one trumpet, and these locusts and teeth, and I don't want to be here. 1 woe is past, 2 more to come. Help us, Lord. Father, we thank you tonight as we sit together for the accuracy of your word and for the clarity with which you give it to us, so that we might certainly in seeking through the word and studying the prophets and looking at all you declared about this day of the Lord, see indeed that we have lots of information about every one of these trumpets and when they occur and what it will bring and what will be the response of the people and what is your intention in bringing them. And as we sit in heaven worshiping you, we marvel at your goodness and your mercy for wicked people who don't want anything to do with you, have written you off, even have gotten through all of these things and still have not decided to surrender their heart. And still you build mercy into your wrath. It's not all of the streams that water, but it's only a third. It's not the complete sun being dark. It's only a third. It's not all of the trees and fruit being destroyed. It's just a third. And so in the oceans, you take, but you take for the purpose of giving. in giving life. Lord, how merciful you are, how faithful, how patient, how long-suffering. Tonight, maybe you are a product of the mercy and the long-suffering of God. You have been living your life in total rebellion, and yet God feeds you, you breathe his air, you live in the body he created, and he will one day call to account. He allows you to make choices, and he doesn't stand in your way, but he longs for you, he loves you, he wants you to love him, but you can't force love, you can only invite it. So God puts on display his love. He shows you all that he's done, and even tells you what the consequence will be of setting him aside. And still you hover in the middle. You're a product of God's long-suffering. God continues to wait. We would have given up on you long ago, but he didn't. Your family maybe has written you off, but he hasn't. Your children won't speak to you, but he will. Your job doesn't think much of you, but he does. You're the product of his mercy. As he waits for you to just surrender your life, and it is the same God that we will find here in the pages of his judgment falling during these 3.5 years upon the earth. The same God, the same merciful God who will edge people forward and inch them along in hopes that they'll surrender, is the one that you'll have to answer to, and the one that you're dealing with today, because you are a product of his mercy. May that work of God in your heart this evening convince you to surrender to him. He loves you with an unending, unquenching, unbelievable love. And if you are to die or separated from him, it'll be his heart that hurts the most. Because not only has he sent his son to secure you, he sent his mercy to wait for you. Pastors are up front tonight. It'll be a great place to go. Would you pray with me? I got to give my life to the Lord. I got to get back to Jesus. I got to go back to following him. I'm tired of being the rebel. And you will find with the Lord open arms and joy over your repentance, and all of heaven will join him in singing of his mercy. It's on you, though. You've got to come.